Understanding the non-identity problem in ethics. Greetings once more. I'm Molly Gardner, and I currently hold a position of assistant professor in the philosophy department at Bowling Green State University, located in Bowling Green, Ohio. This video marks the second installment in a two-part series dedicated to exploring the non-identity problem. In this session, I will provide an overview of various philosophical approaches that have been proposed to address this intriguing issue. To recap from our previous discussion, resolving the non-identity problem necessitates the rejection of at least one of the four conflicting assertions that give rise to it. Here are those assertions once again for your reference. 1. Barbara has wronged Billy. 2. If Barbara has wronged Billy, then the manner in which she wronged him was by causing him harm. 3. The only way she could have caused him harm is by making him worse off than he would have been otherwise. 4. Barbara did not make Billy worse off than he would have been otherwise. We can classify the various strategies aimed at resolving this problem based on which claim each strategy chooses to reject. Let's begin with what we might refer to as the wronging without harming approach. This particular strategy seeks to challenge the assertion that if Barbara wronged Billy, then the nature of that wrongdoing was true harm. To illustrate this point, consider a hypothetical scenario involving a man named Smith. Imagine that Smith tries to purchase an airplane ticket, but the agents at the ticket counter refuse to sell him one due to his race. Later, the plane that Smith would have boarded tragically crashes, resulting in the loss of all passengers on board. In this situation, one could argue that Smith has narrowly escaped a disaster. He is alive and, in fact, better off than he would have been had he been allowed to buy the ticket. However, it is also evident that the agents acted wrongly by denying Smith the ticket. In this case, the nature of the wrongdoing does not seem to be primarily rooted in a moral principle concerning harm. Instead, it appears to be more closely related to violations of rights, issues of fairness, or a lack of respect. For instance, a rights-based principle might assert that a person is wrong when their rights are infringed upon. An unfairness principle could suggest that someone is wrong when they are treated unjustly, while a respect principle might indicate that a person is wrong when they are shown a lack of respect. Many philosophers contend that at least one of these principles can elucidate why Barbara wrongs Billy in the context of the non-identity problem. Nevertheless, these philosophers must also clarify how Barbara's actions violate one of these principles, which is no simple task. For instance, it can be challenging to understand how bringing Billy into existence could be perceived as treating him unfairly. Similarly, it is not immediately obvious why such an action would be considered disrespectful, nor is it clear what specific right of Billy's would be infringed upon by Barbara's actions. Alternatively, we could explore a different approach to this problem by rejecting the fourth claim, which states that Barbara did not make Billy any worse off than he would have been otherwise. Philosopher Caspar Hare has suggested that the first three claims lose their plausibility unless we substitute the name Billy with her child. He reformulates the problem in this way. 1. Barbara has wronged her child. 2. If Barbara has wronged her child, then the manner of that wrongdoing was true harm. 3. The only way she could have caused harm is by making her child worse off than he would have been otherwise. When we reframe the problem, it becomes clear that something fascinating is happening. The term her child has two distinct senses, a de dicto sense and a de re sense. In the de dicto sense, her child refers to whoever happens to fit that description, whereas in the de re sense, her child specifically refers to Billy. To better understand this difference, consider the following joke. Actress Zohar Gabor tells an interviewer that she's found a way to keep her husband young and healthy almost forever. The interviewer asks how she did it, and Gabor replies that she gets a new one every 5 years. The humor lies in the two senses of my husband. In the de dicto sense, Gabor's husband indeed stays young and healthy, but in the de re sense, he doesn't. Harrow argues that in the de re sense, her child makes claim for star true, Barbara did not make Billy worse off than he otherwise would have been. However, Hero argues that the relevant sense is the de dicto sense, not the de re sense. If we use the de dicto sense of her child, we can see that claim for star is false. If Barbara hadn't had Billy, she would have had some other child, let's call him Timmy, and Timmy would not have had poor health. Her child Billy is worse off than her child Timmy, so her child is worse off than her child otherwise would have been. The main challenge Hero now faces is to convince critics that the de dicto sense is indeed the relevant sense in the non-identity problem, which isn't immediately obvious. Let's explore a third approach to solving the non-identity problem, the biting the bullet strategy. This strategy attempts to reject claim 1. Philosopher David Bunin presents the most fully developed argument for biting the bullet in his 2014 book, The Non-Identity Problem and the Ethics of Future People. I highly recommend this book to anyone interested in delving deeper into the problem. Bunin's argument for rejecting claim 1 is largely negative, as he carefully examines other philosophers' attempts to reject each of the other claims and argues that none of those attempts are successful. Since the other claims logically entail that claim 1 is false, Bunin concludes that Barbara does not wrong her child and indeed does nothing wrong at all. I'm not entirely convinced by Bunin's critique of my preferred strategy for solving the problem, which is to reject claim 3. Recall that claim 3 states that the only way Barbara could have harmed Billy is by making him worse off than he otherwise would have been. Those of us who reject claim 3 adopt the harm-based strategy, contending that it's possible to harm someone without making them worse off. To illustrate this, consider the case of Andy the assassin in training, who is hiding in the bushes, pointing his gun at Vincent. Andy's supervisor, Stanley, is hovering next to Andy, pointing his own gun at Vincent. Andy fires his gun and kills Vincent. If Andy hadn't fired his gun, Stanley would have, and Vincent would have died at exactly the same time in exactly the same way. In this scenario, Andy's action harms Vincent, even though Vincent wouldn't have been better off if Andy hadn't acted. In the shooting scenario, it appears that Andy has caused harm to Vincent, even taking his life. This is a substantial harm, yet it doesn't make Vincent worse off than he would have been otherwise, as Stanley would have shot him if Andy hadn't. This case suggests that harm can be inflicted without making someone worse off. However, if causing harm isn't about making someone worse off, what does it entail? The challenge for the harm-based solution is to create a comprehensive understanding of harm that aligns with our instincts about this shooting case, the non-identity problem, and other common harm scenarios. I believe this is achievable, but the debate continues, with many more proposed solutions than the 4 I've mentioned. For instance, another way to refute claim 1 is to argue that while Barbara doesn't wrong Billy directly, she does act immorally by not bringing a healthier child into existence instead of Billy. This approach leans on a principle similar to maximizing act utilitarianism, which posits that actions are morally wrong unless they lead to the greatest overall well-being. However, this principle can yield peculiar outcomes in other procreation cases, implying, for example, that it's better to create numerous people with barely worthwhile lives than to benefit a smaller group of existing individuals. In his 2006 book, Better Never to Have Been, The Harm of Coming into Existence, philosopher David Benetta offers an alternative rejection of claim 3. He argues that harm is about conferring advantages or disadvantages. Benetta claims that all the specific harms of existence, including the harm of death, make existence a clear disadvantage compared to never existing. Conversely, there are no comparative advantages of existence over non-existence, even in happy lives. Thus, he concludes that all acts of procreation are harmful, not just those in non-identity cases. As you can see, philosophers have dedicated extensive thought to solving this problem. I hope this brief exploration of a few intriguing approaches provides insight into what a satisfactory solution might look like. Thank you for your attention.